Hello, everyone out there. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. If you want to hang tight, wait for a few more folks to jump on. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do, I want to point out on the GoToWebinar interface that you likely see in some fashion on your screen that there is a section for chat and a section for questions. So please feel free to utilize those if you want to ask questions during the presentation. Also, if you would like to jump in and ask a question, you can do so as well by unmuting yourselves. I'm going to go ahead and mute you all, though, for now. And if someone could just throw a quick something in the chat just to let me know that they can hear me all right, if someone could do that. And also let me know that folks know how to use the chat box. There we go. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Chelsea, and thanks everyone else as they come in there. So feel free to ask questions or chat in those boxes, and I will answer those as they come up throughout the presentation. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. All right. So the presentation today is going to be on a topic that I've entitled New Beginnings, a curricular approach to residential learning at West Virginia University. So a little bit of background information. We are in year 3 of moving in our residence life department here at West Virginia University from a programming model to a residential learning, residential curriculum model. So as those of you out there that are in this process yourselves, or those that have attended sessions about it, you're likely going to be able to relate to a lot of the things I go over today. I'm going to talk about what our process looked like. I'm going to talk about the process of getting to where we are today. I'm going to talk a lot about the current struggles that we're facing, and I'm also going to share a lot of documents with you too. So those of you that have attended some professional sessions, it's all about sharing. So if there's anything in this presentation that I could help you all with going into more detail, connecting with you offline after the presentation, or sharing other documents with you that are not listed in the handout section of the GoToWebinar interface here, please let me know, and I'd be happy to do that. This is truly a topic that I am passionate about, so I would be happy to talk more about it with you. Okay. So I talked about what we're going to go over today. What I would like to leave you all with as learning objectives is to discover similar challenges that we encountered here at West Virginia University that you might be able to utilize in your own curricular approach to residential education. I would like to provide you with some examples that you can take home with you, and also at least give you a point of contact so that folks in this region that are going through the same process together might be able to link up and collaborate in the future on some of these things. All right. So my audience view was not working, so you all missed the last slide there. So I got it now, I think. There we go. So now my audience view is working. Sorry about that. I'm a little rusty with GoToWebinar, but I always start my presentations with, the most important thing you're going to take away today is one of the names of one of my cats. So this is Bilbo Baggins. He's my most recent kitten that we adopted. My wife and I picked him up from a local shelter. He had been dropped off at a school. Someone had abandoned him at a school in the area. And when we met with him in the shelter, we just fell in love with him, and we took him home with us, and he's now part of the family. So if you take nothing else from this presentation today, this is Bilbo Baggins. He's one of Johnny's cats. So let's talk a little bit about the setting here at West Virginia University so you can have some context in comparison to your institution. So we are a public land-grant research university. We have a residence life department that is situated under a student affairs, student life division. We do have a student services model. We have 12 residence halls. Our enrollment is right below 30,000, with our beds in our 12 residence halls a little over 5,000 there. One thing that I have highlighted on this screen, let me see if I can remember. Yeah. One thing I have highlighted there is our 1-year live-on requirement. I know this is going to be different for a lot of folks in the room. However, for us, this has been very important at West Virginia University in attempting to curricularize what we do here on campus, knowing that for a lot of times we are only going to have students for 1 year. That's going to come into play when we talk about sequence learning a little bit further in this presentation. If you have students for multiple years on campus, your curriculum is going to look a little bit different because you're going to be able to build upon learning that's already occurred. So we have 12 hall directors on campus that we call our residence life specialists. We have 206 resident assistants for a very, very healthy 1-to-13 ratio, with 8 academic LLCs and 4 thematic. So that's a little bit about our department and where Morgantown is at in reference to the rest of the state, and if you were looking at Maryland and Pennsylvania up north, here is Morgantown. About an hour and a half away from Pittsburgh. Okay. So our programming model. So I hope I can relate to a lot of folks out there when you look at this sign-in sheet that I have here. We used to live and die by the sign-in sheet. If you did anything at all of value in our residence life department a few years ago, you had to have names on paper. How many people went to whatever it was you did? That was the main thing we cared about, and that's how we proved that we were a department that was a benefit added to the institution. Was we did this many events and we had this many people attend those events. So a little bit about what we did prior to moving to where we are now. We typically had 1 to 2 programs that RAs would manage on their floor per month. We also had RAs that would jump on and help with a hall director-led hall program per month as well. And these were a little bit more frequent at the start of the semester in the fall, and then they tapered off a little bit towards the spring. But this was the general idea of what programs look like. And you'll note that I'm saying programs. There really wasn't a mandate of what those topics were, but it was do this many programs for your community. RAs did biweekly mandatory floor meetings. That mandatory phrase losing a lot of significance after the first one, when residents figured out that they were not indeed mandatory. Hall directors, they supervise the budget for these programs, and they would often use their own experience and expertise to decide what the topic of the programs were, but it was really up to them. There wasn't really a mandate from the department. We know this about students at this time developmentally, so we're going to do programs on this topic. That really didn't exist. It was simply show us what you're doing in your Hall community. And as I mentioned, success was measured through numbers. How many people did you have on your sign-in sheet? How many people did you have attend programs? There was really no assessment to see if folks that attended programs were more likely to be retained, more likely to make friends, feel connected to the university, and so on. There really was no assessment along those lines. It was just assumed that if you had people attend multiple things, it was more likely that they would be successful. Not a bad assumption, but without data to back it up, it really doesn't go any further than that. So frustrations occurred, as many of you out there can probably relate to. RAs and hall directors, including myself, we started to get frustrated with attendance at these events. We knew that the department needed numbers on paper. However, it was getting harder and harder to get residents to attend the events. It didn't matter how much free food we have or what giveaways we had, we still did not get people to show up in the numbers that we were wanting to. As I mentioned, there was no methodology in the selection of topics. We were kind of just throwing things at a wall to see what would stick. And when you think about what we were doing in our programming model, it's not surprising that we continued to encounter the argument of residence life professionals as the party planners. They did not need a table or a seat at the table when serious discussions were being had at the university because they were the party planners. They were not educators. And that's what this centers around a lot. As us, as housing and residence life professionals, are we party planners or are we educators? Do we look at this from a student services lens? Is the idea to keep the students fed and happy and out of trouble? Or do we look at this from a developmental standpoint, and do we focus on student development and student learning and say, hey, look, we can do a lot better than this. We can, as educators, craft what we're giving to the students in a way that would aid them in their own development. And as you'll see on here, I got various memes that I use in our RA training sessions with the RAs just to try and make it a little bit fun on them. But something the RAs will always tell you how they knew that wouldn't work. So the transition that occurred at WVU was first, my attendance at the MCUO annual conference. So, not so subtle plug, conference attendance is important to keep yourself in the loop with the current trends in higher education, or webinars like this. You don't have to just attend a conference, but you need to get out there and see what other folks are doing, because when I did that myself, I was first exposed to a presentation on a curricular approach to residential education. I thought that was interesting because, as I said, I was frustrated with trying to beg students to attend events. So when I attended that session, I left with a whole new outlook on how we could go about doing things in the residence halls. I have a couple books on here. There are many books out there on this now, but here are the two that I found they spoke most to me. So first, Student Learning in College Residence Halls by Greg Blimling, and then Room Pack's blog that's compiled into a book, Developing a Co-Curricular Learning Model. Those were my starting points after I attended my development session. When reading these books and talking with my leadership team, it came down to the question, why do students even live in the residence halls? So let's assume that we did not exist as residence life professionals. We did not exist. We brought in the Marriott staff to manage the residence halls. Let's say that the students, without the burden of residence life staff on campus, now their tuition went down $2,000. And then they were proposed with the idea, well, parents out there in our region were considering adding in these staff members who are going to put on pizza parties and movie programs and things like that for your students, but the tuition is going to go up, a couple grand for your students. It's a tough thing to sell. If there was no requirement at all for residency, Would your students actually live on campus, and why? I think that's an important question we should all ask ourselves before we move forward in our profession. If you haven't asked yourself that and you're able to answer it at a recruiting session, you really need to think about where you're all at as a department, because you have to sell why students should live on campus. And it just can't be, well, it's because it's mandatory. Are we educators? I talked a lot about that. Do we see ourselves as educators, or do we see ourselves as the party planners with no real control over what's going on in the residence halls? What are our educational priorities? These should be influenced by your department's mission, but what is the priority of your department? You can't do everything. There's not enough hours in the day, but what are you going to focus on? Are we able to do more with less? There might be some of you out there that have infinite resources. I'm sure Stephen at Bucknell, he can do whatever he wants because, of their funding sources. But at WVU, we have a limited number of funds that are continually decreasing. And I'm joking with Stephen out there. I know everyone out there is dealing with the same type of issues over competition with resources. So how can we do more with less? How can we prioritize what we're doing? And can we help with burnout? All right, when I'm having my professional staff members do pizza parties every Saturday night at 9 p.m., eventually there's going to be some frustrations there, especially if we're not assessing if they're successful and there's only a few people attending. So how can we get away from that mindset moving forward? My professional development at an annual conference and these books help me kind of formulate where you're going to see us go next here. So to develop our curriculum, a lot of you that have spoke with some of the experts in this field or been to the Residential Curriculum Institute, kind of this process a little bit. But however, I'm going to walk you through the basic brushstrokes that we went through here at WVU. So we began with the mission statement for both our institution and our division of student life. What do they want to accomplish? What does it mean to be a student at WVU? What does the student life department prioritize themselves? And I have a little excerpt here from the mission statement of WVU that really stood out to us. Was we wanted to create a diverse and inclusive culture that advances education. It's a pretty broad statement, but it's a pretty powerful one as well. So how can we help the institution? How can I show the WVU president that we in residence life are helping them do this? Moving on from there, we examined what do we have the most ability to impact as residence life professionals. So we have the residents in the residence halls. Pretty simple. We have the expertise, or at least the understanding of student development theory, and we have the resources to do things in the residence halls and the ability to communicate with the residents probably to a greater degree than other folks on campus. What we don't have the ability to do, or we're not experts on, is maybe communicating with the residents on their academic skills or financial skills or things such as that. And that's not to say they're not important to us, but it's to say that we found that other folks on our campus were doing these things already. So why should the RAs plan something on their floor around a topic when it's happening at another event on campus by those campus experts? It was something we tried to challenge ourselves with and separate what other folks were doing with what we had the most ability to impact. And then I mentioned student development theory in American higher education history. So for those of you that have gone through a higher ed administration program of some type, some things that assist the curricular approach is what we know generally about students during this time frame. We know that students are developing their identity at different speeds, of course, in different ways, of course. Everyone learns differently. However, we know that students are coming to college as freshmen, and they're trying to find out who they are. Some of them have some of those pieces of the puzzle in place. Some of them are taking parts of their identity from their high school career with them. And then some of them are trying on different hats from their friends that they're around. They're seeing what fits. to see what their unique identity is going to be as they go throughout their college career. We know everyone learns differently. As I said before, this comes up very importantly. Before I moved to this career, I was a secondary education teacher, a high school history teacher, and this was Education 101. Everyone learns differently. So if everyone indeed learns differently, then how can we do a program to educate students on the importance of communicating with their new roommate? How can we do a auditory program on that and expect everyone to get the same thing out of it? The point is you have to diversify your strategies you're using to meet the same goal. And you'll see this come up later, but if a student doesn't learn by going to a program and listening to a lecture, you got to send something out they can read. You got to provide something that they can engage with on their own terms to learn how they learn their own unique person. For those of you on the history side of this, it does back up a curricular approach. So you start off in the early colonial colleges with students who are under the authoritarian rule of tutors and clergy and folks that micromanage every minute of their lives. When the faculty finally got tired of trying to control uncontrollable behavior, they retreated into their research, and students for the first time were given free time on their own. And the sun still came up the next day. Students on their own developed extracurricular activities, things to occupy their time, and that's when you first start to see clubs, athletics, sororities, fraternities. That's when you start to see those things occur. So we know from historical precedents that if we did not exist as student affairs professionals, learning and development would still occur. So then, Johnny, you ask, why do we even exist then? We know that learning will occur anyways. Well, it's because we as professionals, we as educators have the audacity to say that we can somewhat control the learning that occurs and guide it in a certain way to meet our university's mission and meet our departmental goals. We'll talk more about that as we keep going throughout here. So as we thought about what we had the most control over at WVU in residence life, we came up with this. So we decided that when you take everything else away, the things that we can affect residents the most on that other folks on campus cannot, were a resident's intrapersonal development. We can assist residents in developing their identity because we can provide them with the knowledge of other things going on campus, or we can provide their own experiences in the residence halls to allow residents to experience new things, experience new clubs, hobbies, whatever it may be, have interactions with folks on the floor, folks on the hall, folks from different backgrounds. We can provide all these experiences that will allow a resident to try on different facets of different identities until they feel where they're comfortable at in the development of their own unique identity. So we felt like that was important to us. The interpersonal development side of things, we felt like we, unlike other folks on campus, we could provide the venue. We could provide the actual events where residents could get together and interact with one another, work on those interpersonal development skills. We felt like we could impact that, as well as life skills. This is important because, as I mentioned, we have a one-year live-on requirement at WVU. We felt like we had to focus on preparing our students for that sophomore year living off campus, and we felt like we had the best avenue to do that in the residence halls by utilizing our other campus experts and pointing residents in their direction or facilitating the things in the residence halls themselves. So after a very, very painful process, we got our entire leadership team to agree that these were our priorities. And this was what our priority statement was. As I mentioned on the last slide, we were going to create the experiences. We weren't going to force students to learn. We weren't going to drag them to programs. We weren't going to beg them to learn. But we were going to focus ourselves on creating experiences of some sort in the residence halls that would allow residents to learn and polish their interpersonal development and life skills so that they were better prepared for their degree program, their future, whatever it may be. And now that we had our priorities, everything else we started to push away. So no longer were we worried about anything if we could not direct it back to our learning goals here. So I spoke about not duplicating efforts if other campus experts were doing this. So you want to talk about a painful process, but also a rewarding process. We set about in residence life of mapping out everything that was happening during the year, everything we did, everything our staff did, and everything the university was doing. So you can see on this chart that might be a little small for you to see, but with university processes, we listed every major thing that was going on the university in this row here. In the row below it, we listed everything we were doing as a residence life department. And what we tried to do was we tried to make sure there was no overlap. There was things that were not occurring at the same time. As I said, if someone else is doing it better on the university, we're going to send folks to that. We're not going to do it ourselves. Our professional staff need a break. Absolutely, I'll send that chart out, Bill. I'll do that. So if you're squinting at the chart, you can just follow along with my voice, and I'll send this out to you folks so you can have a closer look at it. But university processes in this row here, our departmental processes here, and then we just made sure there was no major overlap between events that were occurring. Now, below that, we have listed our actual learning goals. You'll see interpersonal development, life skills, and those things as we go throughout. And what we did was we attempted to use student development theory to decide which things we were going to focus on at what point of time in the year. And then we listed out our actual learning strategies below that. So in August, we knew that folks were going to be uncomfortable in their new environment. We wanted to focus on interpersonal and intrapersonal development of the residents right away in August. So what we did, and let me clean up my random scribbles here so you can see. What we did was we're going to focus on this in August as a department because we know developmentally students need this right out of the gate. Here are the different strategies we're using to meet the same goal. And those could be floor meetings, those could be some type of event, those could be other things going on. We're going to talk about individual strategies here in a minute. But the purpose of this chart was to show you that we were woefully unorganized and uninformed with things that were going on campus. We needed to see everything laid out in front of us so we could make logical decisions on when things should occur. So we were using and placing them at the best time. And this is just a small snapshot of a very large document that maps out the whole year. So this is how we started with our learning goals, is where things are going to look, where are they going to be at on the calendar, and make certain we're not duplicating efforts that are going on elsewhere on campus. So from there, as I said, we decided what we were going to focus on as we went throughout the semester as a department, as our learning goals. We created our own departmental plan for the communities that fall under residence life, and we challenged each hall director to develop their own community plan for their own residence hall to guide how they were using our learning goals to meet the needs of the students in their community. We had no data at this time, as I mentioned before. There was nothing from previous years for us to make data-driven decisions on what should occur when. So the best thing we had at our disposal, as I mentioned on the last slide, was student development theory. So as an example, in August, we wanted to focus on interpersonal development because we knew that we needed to engage students in the community. Folks were coming here with different levels of identity development, and we wanted to focus on that. So in the absence of data, we focused on theory to decide what we focused on each month out of the year, and that was the departmental plan. In the future, we want to use the assessment we're conducting throughout this year to decide how we lay out our own plan, and then what are the items that each community can focus on based upon past trends in their community. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about planning a program. Remember on an earlier slide, I mentioned how we had to do so many programs. I think a lot of you might be able to relate to telling RAs or being told yourselves as hall directors, do so many programs. The mindset we changed to that was taught to us, when we looked at a curricular approach was you have to start with what your residents need to know. And that's the first bullet point right here is what do you want to meet? What goals do you want to accomplish with your community? So let's use a smaller sample size as an example this time. And so I am the hall director in a building that I know from the rates of conduct documentations in the building that they are having a lot of trouble with forgetting their student IDs to get into the building, or they're having a lot of alcohol problems. I know that from the number of conduct cases that are occurring in my building. So what I want to accomplish is I want to educate my community on alcohol behavior, for example. That's what you want to accomplish. That's what you start with first before you decide I want to do a program. Well, you don't want to do a program. You want to educate your students on alcohol use. That's where you start at, what you want them to learn. Then you got to say, what do I know about my community so far? So do you know you have a very social, outgoing community where folks are going to come out of their rooms to attend a set-down lecture about alcohol education? There's not many communities out there like that would be all about a program of those sorts, but you got to think, what is the goal? And then now what is the strategy to meet that? There will be times when a set-down lecture is the best route to go. However, a lot of times you need to think, how else can I get this across? I know my residents are not coming out to things, not coming out to in-person events. So maybe a different strategy would be that I still schedule the event, but maybe I also summarize the event in a handout that I email out to the community. Maybe I also post some of the most important alcohol education facts on a one sheet or a poster, and I post those in the community. Maybe I also go door to door in the community and very briefly pass out some handouts or talk to folks about the one or two best alcohol resources on campus. So you're going to see how this triages. So if you were simply doing the program, you maybe would have got 5 residents to it. If you simply send out an email with the facts you wanted to get across, with the education that you wanted to happen, if you sent that out in an email, you maybe had half the community read it before they deleted it because they saw it was coming from an RA or an RD, whatever it may be. If you do multiple of those, they compound. So you had 5 people go to the event, you had 10 people read the email, you had 10 more different people glance at the flyer you had on the floor, you had 15 more people that didn't experience any of those other strategies that you touch base with door to door. If you did all those things to meet the goal of alcohol education on your floor, based upon the need you perceived for your community, you have done everything in your power to educate your floor on that topic. Now, the most important thing is, did learning occur? Did your conduct numbers go down? Is there a follow-up survey or a follow-up door-to-door of, did they get anything out of it? Do questions still exist? Things like that. But that's the process. That's how we had to change our mindset. Let's not just do programs and then think of what those programs are going to be, but let's identify needs. Let's decide what the learning goal is, and only then let's decide what the learning strategy is. And then let's see if we can use multiple learning strategies to meet the same goal. Pressure remained on us at WVU to not completely go this route with everything we did. Our administration was not comfortable with us simply identifying needs of the community and using learning outcomes to meet those needs. We still had to provide a list of programs of some sort before they were willing to sign off on allowing us to try this different approach. So the accommodation we made is for all of these different areas that you'll see on our map here, the department put on a traditional in-person program on this topic. So I took it away from the hall directors. I said, I want you to worry about identifying the needs of your community and using our learning goals to meet those needs. I'll worry about the actual programs and the sign-in sheets that I pass on to the boss. So we did programs on all these topics throughout the year while the hall coordinators were educating on their individual topics. However, I do want to point out that we didn't just simply revert to a programming model when we did departmental events. When we did September's alcohol education event that I mentioned before, we followed the same process. I didn't just order 1,000 pizzas and have someone come in and lecture on alcohol education, but our social media, the signs on the floors, the flyers, our newsletters, they all focused on the same topic at the same time. That way, we would accomplish more than just simply doing a program that I think we maybe had 20 or 30 folks out of 5,000 attend. Like I said before, we think about it as, okay, 30 people attended that program, but maybe another 30 read my email, maybe another 30 saw our newsletter, maybe another 30 saw the social media post. We're exposing as many residents as possible to the learning strategy to meet the same goal. So that's the way we blended two different processes so we could still engage in our curricular approach while still making some folks happy that there were still things going on. I talked about community plans, so we're going to look at a couple examples here that I have for everyone. This is what each individual residence hall completed. So each hall director worked on one of these plans and then engaged in updating it throughout the year. And you will see if I can, there's the spotlight. So you'll see here that we had an identification of what the community is. So what are the demographics of your community? Who are your partners that exist in the community? Your facility staff, your dining hall staff in the building, whatever it may be. Your process, what do you want to accomplish this year with your community, and then the strategies you're going to use. And then most importantly, reflections each month on how successful you've been in meeting those strategies and what you might do differently in future months or future years. As we had new hall directors come in, they were basically starting from scratch with what the programming model was. Okay, do this many programs. But now at WVU, when we have new hall directors come in, they can look at these community plans from past years to spot possible trends and give them a stepping stone for their first community plan in their first year. And I do believe I have a blank community plan template in the handout section of your GoToWebinar interface if you'd like to have one of those just to look through. This is only the initial couple pages of that plan. So in addition to the community plan, each residence hall coordinator also created their sequencing chart. So this is how they outlined the things they were going to do in their hall. It's a little bit of a scaled down version of the larger departmental map that you saw a little bit earlier, but each residence hall, let me get my pointer back here, each residence hall knew what the actual departmental initiatives were for a certain month, and then they met them by engaging in these different learning strategies. So whether those were different events for the LLC, different things they did. You can see that this tower did bartender schools, floor meetings, they did door decks, and they did some interactions. So all these things lay out what that residential community is doing. And again, the purpose of this was we felt very, very under-organized, really struggling with laying everything out that was going on, and you had halls doing the same thing at the same time, competing for residents, the few residents that had time to attend events. So this allowed us to make sure that the overlap was not occurring, and we were able to review each hall's plan and how they had it laid out and maybe decide that something would fit better somewhere else. Now, it's important to note here that we also empowered the hall directors to make changes to the departmental map. So we told them that in September, the department was going to focus on alcohol education, as you'll see there on this actual sequencing chart. The department's going to focus on alcohol education. If you can show to us with previous trends or data you've collected in August that you need to change your focus for your community in that month, that week, that day, then that's absolutely fine. So what you find here is we're starting to see our hall directors catching on to the concept, and instead of just simply sticking to the template that we developed using student development theory, they're using their own data to say that, Johnny, in September, for my community, I need to focus on inclusivity because we are having a lot of folks in this engineering LLC coming in, and they've not had a lot of interaction with folks from different countries before. So I need to focus on that right away in September. I'm still going to, support the departmental alcohol awareness initiatives, but that's my priority in my community. Absolutely. Thumbs up. Great job. You're doing what you need to do. As an educator, you're thinking about what your community needs, and you're making adjustments as necessary. And that's where we're hopefully going to get into the place in a couple years where our actual departmental map has evolved into different individual community maps that outline the general learning that's going to occur, so that those adjustments we make are a little bit, there's a little bit less of those in the future. Now, here's what all the programs look like now. So each program, and I still use the word program just for the sake of understanding out there on the call, but if you're doing anything at WVU that requires money or anything at all in terms of what would have previously been considered a program, you're going to do a lesson plan for it. In the lesson plan, you identify the learning objectives, you identify and lay out the experience, reflection, action, and assessment, and then you provide the actual step-by-step instructions. The purpose of this is we hope to one day have a binder of lesson plans that we can simply open, that new hall directors to WVU can simply reference, to where they don't have to come up with these things on their own. They're able to reference past lessons that have occurred, see how effective they were, and then take them out of a binder, make some adjustments based upon their community, their residents at that point in time, and decide how they want to change that up. And this is a good example because this is the one I show to RAs to really get the buy-in. So you think about door decks. Is there anything more boring and uneducational than door decks? When you ask RAs, the answer is no. So what could possibly be educational about a door deck? If the university president called me into their office right after this call and said, Johnny, I saw you spent $200 printing these door decks for students. Why did you spend that money? What value was there in that? That's where I'm going at with this. And this is the same story I use with the RAs. So are we to say that door decks are fun? They look pretty. They, make students feel at home. Okay, that's a pretty noble goal, but where do you have the proof in that? Where do you have it spelled out how you're going to make students feel at home? So I show them this lesson plan. So we want residents to identify themselves as members of the community. We want them to actually see the diversity of the community, and we want them to make connections. So what we do, what the lesson is in August for this call is, we give them these door decks that are blank and they're all the same. RAs really hated that, but when I actually broke this down for them, all WVU freshmen start off with the same door deck because we know generally that students will be a little bit hesitant, they'll be a little bit timid, they will be a little bit nervous about their new home. We want them to have all the same door decks so that way they all feel the same as their new connection is they're members of the WVU community. We then allow the residents after that first day to fill in the things that make them unique. Their name, pronouns, majors, hometown, hobbies, all that. Write down what makes you unique, residents. And then we allow the residents to go around, see what other folks have written down, and you wouldn't think this, but it is the greatest thing in the world to see, oh, you like sports, I like sports. You're from this hometown, I'm from this hometown. You're in this major, I'm in this major, and connections established. So residents all feel part of the WVU community by having the same door deck. We then allow them to customize it so they make connections with their floor that are going to aid them in feeling more connected to their community after that first stressful week at WVU. And Mr. President, that's That's why we spent $200 on those door decks, because we feel like that this is a value added, that it retains students. So what we're doing now is we're looking at the retention numbers. How many students did we lose in that midweek period, in that mid-semester period? Was it any different than years past? And we're trying to build that body of data for multiple years. So that way, when we are doing something, as simple as justifying the use of a couple $100, or more importantly, a couple hours of work by the RAs or professional staff, we can show why that was important. Here's an example of some of the assessment we've done. So, this is one of the tough things for me because I don't have an assessment background, but we're just simply trying to do something to gauge the learning that occurred at all the things we're doing. So this is a couple examples of one, a small handout that we gave out for folks that attended our alcohol awareness event. Pretty simple. We bought a gift card and we said, everyone that takes this, we'll get you entered into that drawing, but we also want to know, did you learn anything about alcohol education? We also did some surveys. So you can see this one, it was a roommate game event, like a roommate game show, to try and encourage residents to get to know their roommates on a deeper level. So you can kind of see the questions we asked there. We asked them, did you learn anything new about your roommate? Is the question that's highlighted here on the screenshot. And, the answer is yes. So again, when my boss or some outside stakeholder is saying, Johnny, why are you doing a roommate game show event? I'm able to at least now show 1 year's worth of data. Well, sir, ma'am, or whoever it may be, we're doing it because when we did it in the past, this many students said that they learned something new about their roommate. And that decreased our roommate issues, our roommate conflicts by this much. This is the data we're trying to build to justify what we're doing. It's a start, but we're getting there. So you can see how simple the assessment can be after major events you do, just to try and show, to tell your story of the learning that's occurring. Most importantly is we took away a lot of the expectations of, you don't have to do a lot of things. For our RAs, we prioritize you have to talk to your residents. And so we created intentional interactions where we provided some guiding questions that we knew from, again, student development theory, that here are some things that might be important to a resident at this point in time in the year. This form right here that you see a screenshot of, this is from an interaction period from January to March. So here are some questions that we think would be important to ask. RAs, can you go door to door or just go around and talk to your residents and ask them questions, see how they're doing, but also try to fit in some of these things we want to know. And then RAs submit forms based on this. We had, some initial hesitation with the RAs about doing this. There was a lot of, well, that's too difficult. The residents don't want to talk to us. They just shut the door in our face type thing. But we had to change the type of RAs we were hiring. We had to move away from hiring RAs that could, in a group interview activity, show that they could plan a program. How fancy of a pizza party can you plan? And instead, we started doing actual mock interactions. We had RAs do mock interactions with RA candidates. How well can you communicate, in a setting where you're trying to ask a resident about how they're doing, what you might do differently this semester based upon what you learned from last semester and things like that. So we prioritize that RAs need to do these interactions with their community, and they need to submit these interaction forms where they summarize their conversations so that we can identify trends in the community that might influence where our departmental map goes. There was a resistance to those interactions, and I talked about we had to move away from the programming RAs more to RAs that communicate, and we had to actually understand that there was time and effort involved in this. We had to make the tough decisions that maybe some of the staff we have now are not best suited for where we're moving as a department in the future. And as I said, just to be funny about it, from these memes from my RA training presentation, it was one of those things where, okay, RAs, this is part of your job now. And if you're just saying that you can't find 4 residents on your floor of 26 to talk to in a 2 weeks, span of time, then maybe you're not best suited for this job. Maybe you're not actually understanding why it's so important to talk to your residents type thing. And we really shared with them. I always share the story of, RAs, that resident might shut the door in your face 5 times when you go by to ask them how they're doing. But on that 6th time, that resident might be behind that door wondering, dealing with some type of mental health issue, some type of big issue, and wondering when that RA is going to stop by again, because now they know where to go to talk to someone about that concern they have. I tell them I want the residents to be so sick and tired of you checking on them that when you knock on the door, it's that RA again checking up on me. That's where we needed to get with this, because if we don't know what's going on in our residents' lives, if the residents don't feel connected to the RA and comfortable enough talking to them about issues, then a lot of the other aspects of our curriculum just do not fit. So that's why it was so important to us. And here's a little bit more of, I talked about, getting the folks out of the mindset of you have to do 2 programs and then decide what the program topics are. So these are a couple slides from RA training, again, that I did earlier this year. So it was trying to break down for the staff the process of what do you want to accomplish? What does your community need? What do you see? Are they all having roommate issues? Do you need to focus on interpersonal development? Like the example before, are there a lot of conduct documentations? Are they all absolutely perfect and they don't need anything at all? And if the RAs would agree with that, I would ask them to prove it, and then I would show that they maybe needed to get to know their community a little bit better. Maybe they weren't doing those interactions like they needed to because they thought there were no issues on their floor. So what does your community need to know? Then what strategy are you going to use? And this was the biggest hurdle for both the RAs and the hall directors. So what strategy are you going to use? And this is where I use this second screenshot here. I tried to explain to them the scenario I ran through with you all prior that, okay, you want to educate your folks on alcohol education. You might get 5 people to a alcohol event on your floor, but if you know no one's showing up to anything, that doesn't mean you're off the hook and you don't have to do anything for your floor. How about emailing them? How about going door to door? How about sliding a flyer under the doors? How about, and so on and so forth, thinking outside the box. I think the best example I saw from some really creative RAs was it was alcohol education. And the goal they wanted to meet with their community was they wanted to provide alcohol education tips. So instead of going right towards a program with pizza and a guest presenter, or going straight to an email or something like that, they got creative and they made these magnets. So they worked with our hall director and ordered a bunch of those puzzle magnets that had alcohol education resources on campus, alcohol education facts on them, and they made those for all the students on their floor to stick on their microfridge in their room. And I thought that was the greatest example I had seen. And I told them, can you imagine that? Thinking about if you would have did an alcohol education program or you sent out an email about alcohol education, you might have had this many students engage in that material. But you did this. And now how many residents are going to glance at that magnet as they open their microfridge throughout the semester, throughout the year? You can't put a number on, the potential there with that. And it's not to say that everyone's going to learn from that. It's that you have reached the maximum number of residents possible with that strategy. The learning is now up to the residents from there, but you've done your part. I thought that was a great example, and we have the lesson plan for that we're going to share with RAs for next year, just to help them, get their mind across some of these things. As I mentioned, we continue to have problems with buy-in from the overall divisional office. It's still tough for them to, at a conversation when they're asking about what we're doing, and we're saying that, well, students are learning this year. Well, how many people came to those things you're doing where students learned? It's tough to get away from that conversation. And what's going to help us is continuing to build up our data that we have to show that learning is occurring through these other strategies. But there is this mindset still, this skepticism that, oh, okay, so you're just saying you're not doing your job now. So you're not doing any programs. You're just sending out emails to the hall. So what are we paying you for type thing? And it all comes down to, how can I show that this works? How can we show that learning occurs? How can I show that we're saving money and time? When you think about the staff buy-in on this thing, when you're able to say, hall directors, you don't have to do these things in the middle of the night on the Saturday, because we know they don't work. We know they're not the most effective strategy. How about try this or try this? It really helps with the staff buy-in. But as I mentioned, you have to have that assessment piece there so you can begin to build your case of what you're doing to meet the university mission, help with retention, so on and so forth. And it's us as educators too. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not uncommon for folks in academic affairs, folks in higher level administration in a division, to view the residence life folks, still as the party planners. And when you start talking about curriculum, when you start talking about learning strategies and learning goals, you're going to get that raised eyebrow, because are we educators or are we not? And for those of you that can relate with that statement, you're not alone. This is happening across the country right now. Student affairs professionals are trying to, continually engage in that debate of whether or not we have the right to call ourselves a profession, and whether or not we have the right to call ourselves educational professionals. And, in my opinion, this curricular approach, backed up by learning strategies, backed up by assessment, is one way that we can strengthen that argument that, hey, you know why the Marriott staff shouldn't run housing at WVU? You know why we should have that little bit extra on students' tuition to pay our salaries? It's because I'm going to show you how, if you live in a WVU residence hall, you're going to receive this education on interpersonal development, intrapersonal development, and life skills. And you're going to be that much better prepared to use your degree to its fullest potential when you get out there in the workforce and society, whatever it may be. That's why we should exist. That's why we're a profession, and that's why we are educators. Moving ahead, as we wrap up here with our time together, kind of our goals moving forward is we've developed some rubrics in which we want to sequence the learning that's occurred. So when I say intrapersonal development, as I mentioned, not everyone comes to college at the same level, at the same place in their lives, in the same place of their development. So we want to be able to provide some general idea of where students would be at an entrance point when we first get them, like right here, not aware of what a social identity is, unsure of their identity. And we want, to the best of our ability, understanding that all students learn differently at different paces, we want to guide them through this process of moving in, moving through, moving on. We understand very much that we're never going to be able to get everyone to where we want them to be, but we want to at least have a sequence process in writing of what we want to accomplish and how we get there. We want to use this curricular approach a little bit more in our RA training and with our student leadership groups. We want to have that lesson plan library that I told you about, where we're not just coming up with things from scratch. We're pulling the binder off the shelf or opening the shared drive folder where we have hundreds of lesson plans that we've saved throughout the years that really identify the learning objectives of each strategy and how successful it was. And then you're just simply picking the lesson plan that you want to use for your community based upon the community's need and making some tweaks that you want to make it your own. You want to personalize it. Building that assessment data and continuing to establish ourselves on campus as educators. I want, in a few years, down the line, who knows how long, but I want to be able to, when someone comes here for a visitation day, we as WVU are not just showing the value of our degrees, but we are showing and explaining the value of living in residence for a year with us. And that's where I want us to eventually get, and it's what my goal is with this entire curricular approach. I want the learning that occurs in our residence halls to be, at the same level as the learning that occurs in the classroom, because without those skills that we're going to teach you in the residence halls, you're not going to be complete, the whole student, as they say in your higher ed graduate classes. If you don't complete the education of that whole student, you're going to have someone that might not be ready to use that degree to its fullest potential moving forward. Couple quotes here to wrap up from the book I mentioned earlier. So if you hadn't had a chance to check out that book, I highly recommend it. It's something I reference almost on a daily basis. And these quotes talk a lot about the experiences. So we create the experiences in which learning can occur. We're not audacious enough to think that we can force learning to occur, by no means. We also know that learning would occur without us. However, without us, we are the ones that actually establish a guide. We use the university mission to decide what types of experiences we can put in place that a resident will encounter throughout their freshman year here with us at West Virginia University to educate them on what the university, what the division, and what our department prioritizes as learning for a student. And that's it. So I want to thank you all so very much for attending here. I'm going to be able to stick around a little bit after if anyone has any questions or wants to talk a little bit, to throw them in the item here. But I also want you to copy that email address if you want to reach out to me to talk more about curriculum or anything that we've talked about today. I'd be happy to do so. If you found some value in this at all, we're going to be saving these webinars throughout the year on our MCUO website. So in the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to visit our website and navigate to a wealth of webinar resources on different topics that MCUO feels like is important to folks in the profession at this point in time. I also think it's important to point out a couple MCUO events coming up. So if you really enjoyed what you got out of this, MCUO's goal is to provide these professional development opportunities throughout the year. So there's still time to register for our Mid-Atlantic Placement Conference. So if you have some job openings, you're anticipating job openings, you know some grads that are going to be looking for jobs, there's still time to navigate to the MCUO website and register for this placement conference. It's a very affordable option if TPE is just not in the cards for you this year, or you just want a more localized experience to the Mid-Atlantic region. So feel free to navigate to the website and look more into MAPCE. And I also want to be looking ahead to our annual conference. So that is early next year in October. If you want to mark your calendars with that, it'd be a great experience, to come out and network. And like I said, it was my first exposure to the residential curriculum was at a session I attended at our annual conference. So love to see you come out and get something out of this. So please share with your departments, with your staff. You keep an eye out for these webinars. Create your profile on the MCUO website. Make sure you follow us on Facebook so you can see about these opportunities. And I appreciate you attending. I'll hang out for a few minutes to answer questions, and we'll go from there. So have a great weekend, everyone.